Every now and then, video game companies release a game that tries to change core principles for their respective series, while trying not to completely alter the feelings and vibes too much, whether it's for a spin-off, for leaps of progression, or for simply shaking up things a bit. For Zelda, it was Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom, the jump from dungeon-based progression to the open world. Or even Metroid, going from a traditional 2D side-scroller which has claimed its own genre, but has dabbled in the first-person shooter genre with the Metroid Prime series. Now when I bring up the Final Fantasy series, Square Enix is no stranger to trying new things while aiming to retain and pay homage to their 3.5 decades worth of work. Final Fantasy XIV and X, one of the best proclaimed games for world building and taking you on a roller coaster. 14 is an MMO, Strangers of Paradise takes a shot at the Souls genre, and even 15, the first real Final Fantasy open world experience. However, there are also motifs that stay the same from game to game, distinct motifs that bring back certain feelings and vibes that I associate with the Final Fantasy series. Now, Final Fantasy XVI decides to tackle on a mature themed story from start to end, a fundamentally different gameplay and system, and even art style. And somehow, they were able to make it feel like Final Fantasy, but not. For everything that the game implements and successfully retains for that distinct identity, in my eyes, there is an equal counterpart that strays further away. I want to talk about why Final Fantasy XVI is not a Final Fantasy game. Hey, it's Billy, and I'll be talking about some of the core components of Final Fantasy XVI, about why it feels different to me and whether it is a bad thing or not. You can think of this video as a way of looking back on the game, or even a review, since it has been released well over 6 months ago, and honestly, this game hasn't left my mind. Whether positive or negative, I just wanted to share my opinions with you guys. If you guys like this video and want to see other games in this style, press that subscribe button and feel free to stay a little while longer. Also, I won't remember every single detail of the game, and if there is something I missed, let me know in the comments below, and if you have your own thoughts, feel free to share it as well. This is your spoiler warning, not just for Final Fantasy XVI, might I add, and lastly, just know that I appreciate you for stopping by here. I want to start by laying out the foundation for Final Fantasy XVI into 3 major parts: their narrative, the gameplay, and the overall design, which will include music, characters, and anything related to that. Firstly, let's talk about the story. The Final Fantasy series has never been shy of having dark moments or dark themes embedded within its story. For example, death and regression, sacrifice and service, war and corruption. Final Fantasy XVI is no different, tackling the ideologies of living on one's own terms and brotherhood. And although it may sound a bit more tame, it's the way the story is presented that it lands a spot as one of the darkest Final Fantasy games. Clive Rosfield is the eldest son of Archduke Elwyn Rosfield and his wife Annabella. With the expectation of being the firstborn, he was supposed to inherit the power of the Phoenix, the icon / the summon of fire. However, he didn't, and his mother essentially shuns him and has this hatred throughout the entire game. His little brother Joshua, on the other hand, received the power instead. As the sworn shield of Rosaria, Clive will do anything to protect his little brother. That was until a sort of raid took place at Phoenix Gate, murdering their father and closing the walls on Joshua, ultimately unleashing his powers to do what he can. That's when Ifrit comes in, the second icon of fire, which was believed to be impossible since each icon represents and correlates to an element. Because of that, all mayhem ensues, and it eventually brought Joshua to his quote-unquote demise. It was only until the next morning where his mother visited the site to enslave Clive and reveal that she had something to do with that raid from the beginning, summing up the first several hours of the game to where Clive seeks out revenge against the second icon of fire. The setup shows how grandiose this installment really wants to be, and the initial plot for revenge is very interesting, however short it may be, before amending and accepting himself to help others. Newsflash, but the promotional material for the revenge trailer hints that Clive is indeed Ifrit. Yeah, sorry, spoilers. But even playing the game without keeping up with the hype train until it's released, I thought it was a little bit obvious where the story wanted to go when they start to head back to Phoenix Gate to try to understand everything. Now, when I am referring to they, I mean Clive, Jill, and Cid. After the events of Phoenix Gate, we skip to about 13 years later and we see our main protagonist cooped up as an enslaved warrior for a different faction, living out his life in bloodshed to gather information regarding the second icon of fire. During these battles, he meets up with Jill, his Rosarian childhood sweetheart, who was also enslaved by another faction. Of course, we save her. I mean, we high-key fight her because our guy's blinded by rage. But we eventually save her and meet Cid, leader of the refugee group known for being able to use magic in this world without bearing a crystal, also known as a bearer. And once Clive finally realizes that he is Ifrit, the main story officially starts. He's always had a kind heart, but was driven by revenge for his brother, to being someone who starts to take interest in helping others, these bearers, and to atone. See, the thing about these bearers is that if they use magic too much, they eventually get caught with this plague or curse, which then punishes them for using magic too much for them to perish. This world thrives on normal people who slave out these bearers to do their bidding before ridding them entirely. And it's such a scummy thing, but the almost realistic outlook is reminiscent even in today's society and history. The core of the story is that to help the bearers and create a world where we can choose how we want to live, the source of all magic will need to wither away and be destroyed. The mother crystals. These beautiful landscapes are the reason why inequality and persecution is prominent, and that is the true main objective of the game. Now we got the bulk of the story summed up, let's mention the standouts. This game is very politically heavy, with the caveat I will mention later, but for the most part, the way the characters interact in the grand scheme of things is very cool and unlike any Final Fantasy game to date. This is a great thing. The way Clive's mother and other parties are manipulated and alter the course of the story is very interesting and had me captivated as we try to take down the mother crystals. Events ensue, like the falling and finding of the bear's hideaway, the past relationships and connections of characters, for example Sin and Benedicta, and even the attempted execution of Jill for the big boy Kupka. Almost everything feels like it has an appropriate connection, and everything up until the Bahamut section was pretty much peak. It's when you add the true antagonist that's where we have an issue. Dual antagonists have always been a thing since the old PS1 JRPG days. It's when you think you know who the villain is and then a bigger baddie comes through, and Final Fantasy just loves to reuse that concept, and that's where Ultima comes in, a godlike sentient being who wants to destroy the world and everyone that resides in it. And yeah, the psychology aspect of the stories are apparent within him, loosely connecting the bears and magic and the overall history, but it's the presentation that is the biggest offender. The first time you really see and hear about Ultima is when you destroy the first mother crystal. He shows up, he kind of moons you and says you'll meet again.
I will find you.
But his actual being is very much incoherent with the pacing of the story. It's really only at the end where he just talks about how he planned everything from the start, since the beginning of time. And don't get me wrong, it's pivotal information. He gives lore about Valestia and the icons, but I don't know, it kind of just feels like information dump, and he didn't really show up until the end and took over the spotlight. I personally think that Annabella is a more interesting villain, to be honest. And when magic was written, tell me why I forgot that was the original goal all along, even though Sid explicitly told us from the start. And I know I'm not the only one who had this issue, because I asked 3 separate people that played the game, my brother, some friends, and they all felt like Ultima was just too sudden, and all his emotional weight that was imbued to destroying the crystals, it definitely lost some meaning. At Phoenix Gate, we see a hooded man that almost looks like an adult Joshua, along with a fiery spirit, which we definitely think is an adult Joshua, but it's actually most likely Ultima's doing. The core concept of creating a world where we can live however we want became too existential. I guess you can say that Ultima's been there since the beginning, but I think with the little tidbits of confusion, it really didn't highlight and heighten the themes. Oh yeah, brotherhood. Now family is super important, but it kind of threw logic out the window when it was presented to us. And don't get me wrong, I love Clive and Joshua's relationship, but this is specifically the story events. In order to purge Ultima, Joshua, by the way, Joshua lives because of the power of the Phoenix and his healing powers and yada yada yada, but Joshua high-key dies again. And before that, blesses Clive with the full power of the Phoenix, and Ultima merges with Clive, essentially putting all the magic stress on Clive. Besides an incredibly sad ending which still hits because of the magic's curse, Clive did one last hurrah and heals his brother. Now throughout the main campaign, it's been established multiple times that the Phoenix cannot bring people back from the dead. Joshua got the Rengoku treatment. There is no way you're telling me he was alive this whole time and he actually lived to write the book at the end of the game called Final Fantasy. And that's how the game ends. The plot points I mentioned overall hindered my experience. And I do have more to mention in a second, but I think that's enough for the story itself. The most contrasting elements of this game has to be the combat, mechanics, and system. Now the combat system in Final Fantasy XVI is amazing, but it has one major flaw: the simplicity. I have never beaten a Devil May Cry or Bayonetta game where comboing and flashy button presses are the way to win, and never in my life did I think this game would be similar to those. But I do think that Final Fantasy XVI is indeed simpler than them. These games are relatively hack and slash. It's fully free-flowing action-filled battles that allow you to control your character's movement so you can dodge out of attacks whenever you feel like it, and it's amazing, especially when you hit that well-timed slow motion. You have a button for your icon abilities, one button for your sword swings, and another button to cast a magic bolt of a certain element, and 2 skills along with it so that you can combo into your regular attacks. And the deeper you get into the game and master an icon or a summon, you can add those skills on top of another summon, essentially allowing you to mix and match and be nearly as versatile as you want. It's great. Now the simpler portion comes in the fact that you will primarily be spamming, and I mean spamming the attack button, because it is the kind of everything move. For generic attacks, check. Used between magic shots, check. Used for icon abilities, check. Used after dodging, check. Dude, it's even used to parry. There is no specific button to parry or block in the game, and it's pretty much a consensus to hold square or your sword button down for your burning sword technique, and release it before you get hit to pull off that parry window easily. And that's where it kind of falls off for me. You'll be doing a ton of new moves and combos, but they feel muted because of how spongy and simple the enemies really are. Again, I'm not saying the combat is bad. In fact, it's amazing. It can even be really intricate, but the fights you're really looking forward to are either those mini bosses, the real-time bosses, you got hunts, or lastly, the icon bosses, and I will get to that later. But on top of all of that, we have a measly RPG system. In my most recent RPG video for Star Ocean, I mentioned that their mechanics and systems for engaging and altering stats are so in-depth with tons of crafting and choices. It truly was overwhelming at points. Now it feels like Final Fantasy XVI is completely opposite and linear in comparison to every aspect. You don't get as many choices for new weapons, and those that you can craft are typically outclassed by the main story once you get another hour from that. Of course there's the post game, but that didn't matter to me as the majority of my playthrough was during the campaign, and I would assume that would be the case for most people. You have some cool accessories, and I appreciate that the game gives you some options to alter difficulty or be more autopilot. It's actually a great feature, but the RPG aspects of this game are to get good weapons through the story, use skill points on your favorite summon, and fight. It's omega bare bones. But for something that's supposed to fine-tune your abilities and character development to create a sense of progression and path for your party, I don't think we have anything like that in Final Fantasy XVI. If we're talking about a RPG system that is effective, what happens to something like the materia system in Final Fantasy VII, where you can equip certain skills or magic and level them up in a way where you have to basically pick and choose which materia or certain skills you want on your characters. It's a neat little system so that you can customize and try out new things while also being a little bit of a management system. But for Final Fantasy XVI, it feels very limiting in a lot of its mechanics and systems. Now I have one quick last example, but it's about your party. In most Final Fantasy games, you're able to switch out your party or switch who you're playing as during a battle. In this game, you are only controlling Clive. I wish you could have controlled Jill considering how much she was in your party, or Sid. At least for Clive and Jill it makes sense. So I was a little bit bummed out when they weren't able to implement that. I know in Final Fantasy XV they weren't able to implement it until, like, what was that? A year after the game came out? But I do think it's a missed opportunity. Alright, but real talk. Let's finally get to the good part. The icon battles. Any of the icon battles might just be in the top 10 moments for any game. You literally start off the game with a banger. When you're playing as the Phoenix and then you relapse and then you get to play as the Phoenix again and then you're trying to fight off Clive. Oh my god, and these icon battles, they definitely play like a souped up normal battle, but it feels like anime-ified, if that makes sense. Take the Bahamut fight. This is where the game truly peaks. This is like a 10 out of 10 moment. Truly a 10 out of 10 moment. It's just you and your brother trying to defeat this big ass dragon. And when you go Super Saiyan, oh my god, it's so cool. I guess people do complain about the game feeling a little bit too cutscene-like or movie-like. I mean, this is kind of like the JRPGs of what God of War is trying to do. Most icon battles that look like cinematics, you'll probably end up playing one way or another. For the first time playing the game, it is 10 out of 10. But if you plan on replaying Final Fantasy XVI, some of these icon battles specifically are just very lengthy and take up a good chunk of time. Alright, I think we are headed to our last section. It's just the overall design, so that encapsulates the characters, music, and just kind of any other thoughts that I may have missed. If I haven't said anything already about the music, oh my god, it is immaculate. The score, Masayoshi Soken really hit it out of the park with this one. It feels a little medieval, it feels very triumphant most of the times. Yeah, there are like a lot of mood setters, of course, just like every game, but something about this one's just like, it fits the game so well. And a lot of the music, I kind of would listen outside of it, even though they are triumphant. And it's definitely not triumphant enough where it's not catchy. A lot of these themes are pretty catchy, like Away, Clive's theme, Shiva's theme. Oh my god, the ending. Oh my god. I didn't get to mention the characters as much as I wanted, but Clive is just such a sweetheart at the end of the day. Super heroic. I love his vibes. This man got that dog in him.
And I will do my duty.
What are you...
gonna be real, how can you not fangirl sometimes? Definitely in my top 5 main characters for the Final Fantasy series. Same with Jill, however I think they just did Jill a little dirty. She's a fantastic heroine and she does have a lot of build up and character development. She even has her own kind of story arc. After that, she kind of just got tossed aside, and there were times that I wish that Clive and Jill's true relationship was fleshed out a little bit more. And I guess you could say that about all the characters, because there are no additional interactions excluding the narrative and the side quests that give these characters a little bit more life outside of the story. Like, it was cool getting to see Joshua again, and he definitely had his moments, during the Bahamut fight and afterwards all the way until the end. I would have liked to have some dedicated interactions somehow integrated in its own systems, or definitely flesh out the side quests a little bit more. It's not that the side quests are bad. When it comes to the main cast, they're pretty good, but when it comes to just the generic NPCs you do these quests for, the bears and the refugees, some of them are actually really dark. A lot of them are just, you're gonna be delivering people some items like soup or lumber, which is just like, And before we hop off this character train, I do want to mention Odin. Odin. Dude, you could have been so cool. His initial appearance was shrouded in all this mysteriousness, but when it came to Clive finally confronting him, we end up finding him a couple, if not several times, only to get our ass whooped. We finally get Shiva, and all of a sudden, with the power of friendship, we are able to overcome. It's like we previously fought Odin and we've lost a couple times. We can feel that there is a power gap between us. Bro, this dude cut the freaking ocean.
Tell him to bring out the whole ocean.
So at least for me, it does feel like there is a bit of discontinuity here. Like, yeah, we got Shiva, but if my memory serves me correct, I don't believe that we even used Shiva in the cutscenes. And when Odin was like, wait, I still got this, homie really just hit him with the, I'm that guy. Now, the one last thing I want to talk about is going to be the exploration. The level selections are beautiful, but there's just nothing inside of them. Usually, I mean, there's a very minute amount of items that may be good, like you might actually find like a sword or something out in the field, but for the most part, it is like 1 or 2 gil, like bruh. Just off the top of my head, I was very surprised that this game wasn't a fully open world game. They did mention that it was going to be like open zones, but these zones are very confined, extremely confined, and since there's not too much to do in them, you're kind of just running. I think the choice between sticking with either a linear story progression versus this open kind of mid ground is a little weird. They shouldn't have settled in between. But I don't know, I do feel like it, for me, would have created a better immersion experience, and it would have possibly made more interesting exploration options. And I think that is the end of the video. This is definitely one of the lengthier ones I've done on the channel. It may seem like I've nitpicked the game to oblivion, but to be honest, the points that I've highlighted that were good are really good, and I mean really good. The story and the combat itself. However, for every positive, there is a negative. This game doesn't feel like a Final Fantasy game because there's not a lot of good incentive for exploration. I personally feel like the story does fall off a little bit towards the end, and there's just a very light RPG system. I do think this game is worth playing, but these are my reasons as to why I don't feel like it's a Final Fantasy game. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm going to give this game a C+, even though it's definitely on the lower tier and it does feel like I'm nitpicking at the game. It is something truly worth playing. It has some of the highest highs I've played in any video game, but equivalently, the lowest of lows. If you guys agree or like this video, feel free to give it a thumbs up and press that subscribe button to stay a little bit longer, as it really helps me out. And if you stuck all the way until the end, I appreciate you dearly. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is on its way, and guess what, guys? I'm kind of feeling like I'm going on a Final Fantasy spree. I would like to talk about the Final Fantasy VII Remake pretty soon. But if you guys have any other suggestions, feel free to comment it down below, and I'll be seeing you in the next video. Peace!